Hello, BookTube. I have a rambly discussion video for you today on a time-honored subject, which is self-publishing versus traditional publishing. I have a vested interest in both. I have helped many authors to write books that then went on to become traditionally published, and I get joy. I've had the joy of seeing those books as they arrive and seeing those people embark on the life of a published author with a traditional house. Uh, but I've also reviewed and read, championed many self-published books. I've reviewed self-published books in vast numbers in my lifetime, and I don't hold any of the disdain towards them that more traditionally minded people might have. Uh, so I'm on both sides of the fence, and as usual, when I'm trying to decide the merits of an issue, I like to see those merits laid out, pro and con, in neatly ordered lists by cutie patooties. So, as a public service to the rest of you, I found two cutie patooties willing to do that on their booktube channels, and I will leave the links to them down below. I thought I'd go through the points and then discuss. And the first is Cam from Wool Shop Publishing. I mentioned his channel before. I keep going back to it, as usual, with booktube channels I love. I keep going back to it expecting to see 5,000 subscribers, and I don't ever see that. I haven't yet, anyway. I'm sure that I will. But a while ago, he did a video where he lays out the pros and cons of self-publishing versus traditional publishing. I thought I'd go over his points because they were really good. First, he did the pros, and for self-publishing, the pros are, he listed four. One, you're the boss. You control everything. No one gets to dictate terms to you. Number two, you're already accepted, which is a nice way of putting it. There are no gatekeepers, traditional gatekeepers for self-publishing. If you, as he puts it, if you want to write a book consisting of an endless repetition of one phrase and publish it on Amazon, you could. You wouldn't get any sales, but you could do it. The decision to do it is entirely up to you, and the reality of it is entirely in your hands. Number three, you set the prices, and that's self-evident, and it works at both ends of the spectrum. You can make it as cheap as you want. You can also make it as expensive as you want, and with a lot of self-publishing venues, you can determine what cut of the take you get, which is unheard of in traditional publishing. And number four is connected to that. Your take can be very good. In some kinds of publishing, up to 70% of each sale is yours. That's a fantasy with traditional publishing, but it is a term that you can set with self-publishing. And then the cons of self-publishing, he listed five. Number one, you pay for everything. So, even with the services that are out there that offer you, that say this is all free, well, it's all free, but you get what you pay for. If you want an eye-catching cover, it's going to cost you money, unless you're, by some freak coincidence, a cover design expert. Same thing with professional editing. Same thing with formatting, computer formatting, unless you know how to do that yourself. All that will come out of your own pocket, and it can add up. Con number two, you do everything. You do the marketing, you do the outreach, you do the pitching, you do the deals and when they start and when they stop. You do the gutters and the margins and everything. You do it all yourself. It's entirely your production. And that means a lot of time sunk in that isn't in any way connected with writing. Con number three, no bookstore distribution. Cam is very direct about this, and he should be. Self-published books don't show up stacked on the new release tables of your local bookstores. Con number four, market saturation. This is also a very good point that a lot of first-time authors don't give sufficient thought to. Thousands and thousands of people self-publish their books every year. It's a big market. It's not the same thing as being the only fiction writer on the fall list for Penguin Random House. Then you sort of stick out by default. But that's not true if you write the first volume in an epic fantasy, starring armor-plated octopi. that isn't true. If you write that, your book will appear in a list of hundreds of first books in new self-published fantasy series, and you just have to deal with that. And con number 5, you could blow your chance at traditional publishing. And I was glad that Cam meant this point not in terms of the stigma that attaches to self-publishing. We'll get to that later on, if there is one. We'll talk about that in a minute. But rather in terms of reviews, he's entirely right about that. If you self-publish a stinker, and it gets lots of bad reviews, a traditional publisher down the line is going to see that. They're not just going to see the book; they're going to see that the book failed to find an audience, and that's really important. But he also listed the pros and cons of traditional publishing. And I wanted to go over those too, even though they'll be very familiar to you, because he did a good job of it. Pro number 1 for traditional publishing is distribution and exposure. They have a network, a system in place to put forward their wares to the public. Pro number 2, they do the structural stuff, the support stuff. They have an editing team, they have a formatting team, a cover design team. They have all of that. They're layers of people designed to make your book look professional. Pro number 3 is they get you into bookstores. Random House, St. Martin's, they send a box of books to Barnes and Noble, and then Sue at Sue's Book Nook unpacks it, and it goes on a library cart, and it goes out on, and then some drooling, neck-bearded illiterate shelves it in the wrong place, and then the store's 1 or 2 genuine book people comes along, sees that it's shelved in the wrong place, shelves it in the right place, and then all of a sudden your book is in front of the public. I believe it goes something like that. At least it did when I was in bookstores. And pro number 4 is that they pay in advance. They cut you a check for a chunk of money. Those are the then there are cons for traditional publishing, and these are also well known, especially if you've ever tried it. Con number 1 is you need to find an agent, and the agent isn't just going to say whether or not they want to represent you. Agents nowadays, especially in the last 30 years, have assumed the role of publisher readers. Publishers used to have readers that would read manuscripts as they came in and determine whether or not they had any value and push them up ahead, for recommendations. Most publishers don't have those anymore, and that function has devolved to agents who can get mighty uppity and who often don't know much about what they're talking about. But we'll get to that as well, the alleged expertise of agents. And then number 2 is you'll experience rejection. It's sort of a mirror of the number 2 of you're already accepted. Number 2 of a con of traditional publishing is that you will get rejected a lot. You've all heard stories of the authors who used to paper their work studies with rejection slips. That actually happens. Usually for reasons that can be mitigated or avoided, and we'll get to that as well. Then number 3, publishers have a ton of creative control over your product. They decide on the cover. They'll sometimes give an author a choice of 2 or 3, but just as often not. They'll decide on formatting. They'll decide on price. They'll decide on distribution and angle and whatnot. And it's often outside of the author's control. I've known many young authors who would go to signings and people would be a little confused and say, you'd walk up to them and say, well, I never pictured you writing a YA book. And they'll say, I didn't write a YA book. My publisher decided to print it this way. They decided to market it this way. But I didn't. It was never my intention. That can happen. That happens all the time because, as Cam points out, the publisher is putting a lot of money and time and effort into your book. They expect a say in their product. Number 4, you're not number 1. There'll always be bigger fish on the publisher's list, taking down the lion's share of time, attention, and money. Number 5 is you'll do lots of waiting. That's absolutely true. From the heady moment when you get a letter or an email or a phone call from your agent telling you that she placed your book, that she sold your book, from that moment to the point when you are sitting at a table at a Barnes & Noble signing your book, a very large amount of time can go by, and you just have to make your peace with that. There are delays all over because you're dealing with an institution. the publisher is an institution. You're dealing with layers and layers of people, timetables of their own, outsourced work. It's inevitable. And number 6 is that you still have to sell well. You still get paid crappily, except for the very upper echelon, the very upper small percentage of writers. The pay is still awful. And Cam listed all these pros and cons, and he said, at the end of the day, it's your choice what you do one way or another. But at the end of his video, he points out that he himself is self-published. He's a self-published author and intends to continue doing that. So that's kind of an implicit argument one way or another. Then we've got the other side of the question. And for that, we move on to Cutie Patootie number 2. And that is Chris at Christopher Keelty. And I'll leave the links down below here. And he did a video called 5 Reasons You Shouldn't Self-Publish. And he lists them as, number 1 is Nielsen book scan. He says in his video that he's amazed that most would-be authors have never heard of book scan. And it's a book rating system that keeps track of how well books do, when they appear, that sort of thing. And I wasn't completely clear on the point he was trying to make here. There's a problem with a number of the points in his video. He does a lot of shaming on his points about self-publishing. A lot of mentioning of selling it to mothers and grandmothers and aunts and uncles and all that, as if that's the only thing that a self-published author can hope to do. And I realize that's true in some cases, but let's draw a clear distinction between self-publishing and vanity publishing. Vanity publishing back in the old days was you did exactly that. You paid to have your book printed. You got a box shipped to you out in Oshkosh, and you literally distributed the books to your aunts and uncles and grandmothers, and they went up on bookshelves, and that was it. That was the end of the process. Self-publishing in 2016 doesn't bear any resemblance to that at all. So I'm not. Self-publishing in 2016 has prices and ISBNs and some kind of distribution. It's. I'm not sure where all the mentioning of aunts and uncles and grandmothers was, but he was. The point he was trying to make with Nielsen is that they track sales, and they will display forever that your first book barely sold at all. I guess with the implication being that could at some point down the line be used to criticize you. I don't really know about that. And he also points out something that is very germane to our discussion today, which is that the Nielsen doesn't apply to ebooks, doesn't track them at all. And there's a lot of other things that Nielsen doesn't do, and we'll get to that. But his point number 2, his second reason why you shouldn't self-publish was limited time. And this connects with what some of the points that Cam was making, pro and con, which is that the whole ball of wax is in your hands. You do it all, and you have to do it all, unless you're willing to delegate and pay other people to do it. That Chris points out that you have to do marketing and cover design, and his quote was, "I'm not trying to build a career as a book marketer. I want to spend my time writing." Well, don't we all? But nevertheless, if you self-publish, you're going to have to do all of that, and it's success or failure will largely come down to you. You won't be able to say, well, the marketing department at Random House did a crappy job. Although what consolation you'd get from saying that, I don't really know. But anyway, his quote, "I'm not trying to build a career as a book marketer. I want to spend time writing." Okay, legitimate point. But let's see if it holds true in the course of his own video. And then his reason number 3 was bookstores, the exact same thing we just mentioned from Cam's video, which is that he puts it, more than half of all book sales still happen at point of sale in physical bookstores. And that if you're a self-published author, that will never happen. You won't be in physical bookstores. You won't be stacked there. The second point that he makes is absolutely right. Self-published authors do not show up in bookstores. The first point, the legitimizing point, more than half the sales, I honestly don't know where he's getting that from, unless 2003, 2008, something like that. But I suspect that he's getting that point from the same source he got his first one from, which is some variation or some reporting on Nielsen. And as we're coming to the point where that isn't the wisest way to go. more than half of book sales in the United States or the UK do not happen in physical bookstores. That hasn't been true in at least a couple of years. But the main point is correct. Exposure you won't get. And then reason number 4 is math, and this is where I think a lot of his arguments break down. As cute as he is, he cites 2013, says that 460,000 self-published books appeared in 2013, and that something a little around 300,000 traditionally published books appeared at the same time, and that for traditionally published books, 10,000 copies sold is good. It's a little above baseline. It's what you really should do in order to keep the whole process moving. Whereas with self-published books, 1,000 copies is considered good. And the implication there, in his point, is that the math is working against you as a self-published author. And I don't see that. And I don't think the math follows at all. First of all, 1,000 copies as a self-published author, well, okay, the vast number of self-published authors won't sell that many copies, but a great number of them, and a very much increasing number of them, sell far more than that, 1,000 copies. There are self-published authors here on BookTube who would consider that disgracefully low as sales numbers. So I have a feeling that these numbers are sort of mired in 2013. It's 3 years later. Things change. Like for instance, if you were going to do a video on the saturation of cell phone technology in the world, would you use 2013 data? You wouldn't make any sense if you did. Everything has changed since then. The numbers have gone up asymptotically. But also that number, 300,000. Traditionally published books that came out in 2013, he points out in his video that includes reprints. What he doesn't point out in his video is that also includes textbooks, Bibles, Bible studies, workbooks, school-related books. If you carve away all of those from 300,000 books, you will get, if we're talking new, original, genuine books, the type of thing that you are thinking about when you think, I want to be an author. Nobody, when they're doing that, thinks that they want to write Portuguese workbooks, Portuguese language learning workbooks for the next 40 years. They don't think that, but that's a large part of that 300,000 total. If you take out all of that stuff and you leave just the real books, the number is closer to 100,000. So you're taking a number of 100,000 and then you're factoring in 10,000 copies sold. You're not doing that on 300,000. You're doing it on 100,000, which means the odds of doing it go up enormously. They go up by 2/3. And that's not true with self-published books. The number of self-published books that fit into that category of dross that we will carve away is less than 10%. Nobody self-publishes that kind of stuff. They just don't do it. Why would they? The number of self-published books that aren't meant to sell, that are meant to simply be used by schools or libraries or whatever, is vanishingly small. Which means there's a big, broad spectrum out there. That it's not anymore this, with traditional publishing, it's this narrow little chute that you have to get through. But anyway, the math is the weak point of this video. And the reason for it is the reliance on Nielsen, on the Nielsen rating system, which is, not only does it not cover electronic publications, which is insane, but its coverage of printed books is wildly faulty. Just wildly faulty. They first of all, they are paid to play favorites, and that should eliminate any discussion of them right there. But also, there's a vast number of things they don't take into consideration. It's not just ebooks that they don't take into consideration. They also don't consider small presses, very small presses. I mean, where you set up something and you are making physical books, but you are also making ebooks. Micro presses are what they're called. Nielsen's don't cover that, and the number of micro presses that have appeared since 2013 is gigantic. It's big enough to affect the whole landscape of publishing, which is exactly what it's done. There are all sorts of other places out there that are trying their best to grapple with these changes and give us some actual useful numbers, but Nielsen isn't one of them. So best move on to the next reason against. The last reason, number 5, is craft. Where he does, in his video, he does a funny bit where he has a little role playing about the typical understanding of what gatekeepers are. You know, they're all in New York. They all know each other. They publish their friends, that sort of thing. And he points out that this isn't true. That a lot of publishing agents and whatnot don't live in New York. And as he points out, a lot of the ones that he's familiar with watch The Bachelor and read Hunger Games. So 2 points here. First, that's a wee bit of an exaggeration to say that the lion's share of literary gatekeepers, especially at traditional publishing houses, we're talking 95, 96, 97% of them, the lion's share of them live and work in New York. I'm not saying that they know each other. I'm not saying they only publish their friends, but it is a very concentrated industry, far more than any other industry in the world. There's no point in arguing against that. But what is this argument about these gatekeepers doing you a favor by preventing you from publishing something that, literarily speaking, you might end up being embarrassed about? On the one hand, he says that the gatekeepers that he himself is familiar with are more likely to watch The Bachelor and read Hunger Games. And on the other hand, he's saying they make excellent expert gatekeepers for literary quality. That isn't true at all. You can't have both of those. First of all, they're either pop culture morons or they're discriminating book critics, one way or the other. They can't be both. And also, have you looked at the bestseller list lately? The bestseller list is the product of traditional publishing gatekeepers. Doesn't exactly do them a lot of credit. I know a lot of these people, and they are incredibly overworked. They are incredibly underpaid. They're incredibly stressed to produce, and they get a ton of material sent to them by agents all the time. They can't possibly read it all. They can barely even look at it all. And they often do go on serendipity. They go on a nice meeting at a reading at the Y or at a literary convention of some kind, booksellers association, and I've seen this happen many, many times, or they will go to lunch with their ex and they will have the absolute best chicken Caesar salad they've had in weeks. And not only that, but the ex will seem kind of receptive to, we had it good for a while, maybe give it another try. Nothing definite, mind you, but you come back from that lunch with a bounce in your step. Oh boy, I had a great meal. I had good news at the meal. Life is looking up. What's this manuscript? I love it. I hate to say it, but that happens when authors, would-be first-time authors who are thinking about self-publishing, look at the traditional publishing world and think, isn't a lot of it just luck? Isn't a lot of it just stupid timing? Why would I want to subject myself to that? If you are Chris and you come along and try to make the argument that that isn't true, you've got your work cut out for you, because the evidence is strongly against you. He finishes with that. He finishes with that 5th point, that that traditional gatekeepers help you because they insist on a certain level of craft. They're not going to pick a book that doesn't jump off the page. Now, I have read The Hunger Games, and I didn't see any literary quality in it. Something jumped off the page, but the something that was in it had nothing to do with anything that the publisher polished it for, prime time. But the thing was the tang of the premise, not the execution, not the writing, not the pacing, certainly not the characterization. And any self-published author can have that tang of a premise. I've read a lot of them that do, where, ooh, that's a really good idea. Execution, metza, but that's a really good idea. Now, a traditional publisher, if you're lucky, if you land in the hands of a really good team, they will help you to sharpen that thing, that zingy premise. But they can't make it go there. They can't put it there to start with. But they can certainly ruin it. And also, they're not guaranteed to see it. But the final point that I want to make of Chris's video kind of works against what he is saying in the rest of the video, because he finishes the video in the standard YouTube way by saying, kindly give this video a like and a subscribe so that I know that it's reaching people. So, in other words, this was good enough for you to be your own boss. You don't want a segment producer telling you how to make a video about the 5 reasons you shouldn't self-publish. No. If a segment producer were to come along and try to tell you that, you'd tell him, take a long walk on a short pier, and you'd be right to do so. So what was the appeal of BookTube for you? Why didn't this 5-reason list wait until you could do it as the end spot on an evening news local channel? You're good enough looking to do it in front of a camera in a studio. Why didn't it wait for that? Well, it didn't wait for that because you had a platform, you could do it well, and you did it. Simple as that. And then when you were done doing it, you asked for likes and subscribes so that you could connect directly with your audience. Well, there you go. That the last few seconds of your video made an excellent counterpoint to the rest of it. That is why a lot of self-publishing authors do it, because they want to skip the interning and the trying out at 3 a.m. and the smaller station and then the bigger station, and then finally you get to say your 5 reasons for not self-publishing on WCB TV in local Cincinnati, and everybody gets to see it, and it's well polished because you got through the gatekeepers. Plenty of self-published authors don't want to go through that. So this is a hideously long video, but I am going to wrap it up now. This is going to be my first 30-minute video, and the rest of you have no one to blame but yourself. All that talk about wanting to hear me ramble. But at least I'm on a subject this time instead of how hot it is. But my point is my conclusion when I have these 2 videos side by side. I have done the research. I have put one cutie patootie against another and had them argue it out. And I think the argument comes down clearly in favor of self-publishing. Traditional publishers don't do the work anymore. Almost all of the pros that Cam is generous enough to list don't apply anymore. The money is terrible. And even once they've paid that money, you then get an email from them saying, well, here are the 5 cities nearest to you. Get in your car. Good luck. That's your publicity. That's the publicity material. You could do that yourself. And what are you going to get in exchange for the gas money and the going and the hotel rates and all that, none of which is comped by your publisher? What are you going to get for that? A few sales. Fewer sales than you would get if you funneled that same amount of money and energy into doing the hoofing around for your own book, that you've published yourself. I have looked at this many, many times, and aside from the lightning bolt on the golf course, 1,000,000 to 1 odds, the Garth, Risk Hallberg, that sort of thing, where you worked forever on a gigantic manuscript, you lose friendships, you strain your familiar relationships, you strain your romantic relationships, you're late for work, you're fired, you attain or maintain a drug dependency, you go through all these sleepless nights in the dark, and then eventually lightning strikes, and against all odds, you get a multi-million-dollar contract. Okay, well, you get a multi-million-dollar contract and you are set for life. Everyone is going to take seriously everything you write from here on out, and you are an author. But in 2016, the odds of that happening to you are astronomical. And there's this whole other thing you can do where you can still become really popular, even phenomenal, and wealthy. You can still gain the paycheck and everything. So if what you want is that, if you want Alan Garganis, if you want, I have this 800-page manuscript, oldest living Confederate widow tells all, I'm going to flog it all over the place, I'm going to get blurbs from every writing person that I've ever known, I'm going to wait and try and starve and hope and dream, and maybe it'll happen, and then it does. If that's what you want, more power to you. You at least now have laid out in front of you all the obstacles you're going to face. But if you want something other than that, if you want something where you can say, I'm a writer, and you don't have to put air quotes around it because you're paying your mortgage with what you make, that's possible to do without any of the falderall and without waiting around on the golf course for the lightning to strike. So I just thought I'd make that point. When it comes to self-publishing versus traditional publishing, my vote is self-publish. especially now, and only going to get better as time goes on. And the only real way, scientifically, to settle this would be for Cam and Chris to argue it out face to face in bed. And so we'll look forward to that. Thank you, BookTube.